There is a town in Nevada that drowned. Not metaphorically, actually drowned 60 feet under a reservoir, its ice cream parlor and its schoolhouse sitting in the dark for decades. And then, as the water pulled back, it came up again. Foundations, cisterns, a wall that used to sell milkshakes, a ghost town that does not just sit still and decay like the others. It disappears and returns on a schedule set by drought, and nobody can promise you it won't vanish again. That one is coming at number 1, and once you see what it looks like today, you will understand why it is the strangest place on this entire list. But Nevada has more than 600 abandoned towns scattered across its deserts and mountains, more than the number of towns that are still alive today. And this video is counting down the 17 that are the weirdest and the most cut off from everything. The ones you cannot stumble into by accident, the ones you have to actually go looking for. If you are new here, go ahead and hit subscribe because we do one of these deep dives every week. And I would genuinely love to know in the comments where in the world you are watching this from tonight. Let's start at 17. Number 17 is Rhyolite in Nye County, right on the edge of Death Valley. Gold brought this one to life in 1904, and within 2 years it had almost 5,000 people, electric lights, an opera house, and a stock exchange, all built on the promise of a mine that looked bottomless. At its peak, the town supported around 50 saloons, 3 dozen gambling tables, and close to 20 lodging houses, which tells you exactly what kind of energy filled its streets after dark. It didn't last. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake, hundreds of miles away, disrupted the rail service the mines depended on, and by 1910, Rhyolite was finished. What's left is almost cinematic. A 3-story bank standing open to the sky, a train depot, and the bottle house. An entire home built out of thousands of discarded liquor and beer bottles by a miner named Tom Kelly. Rhyolite is famous. The next one is not. Number 16 is Gold Point, tucked southwest of Goldfield in Esmeralda County. It went by 2 other names first, Lime Point and then Hornsilver. And it actually outlasted most of its neighbors, running through the boom, the bust, and the entire Great Depression, until the government shut down non-essential mining for World War II. After that, it was left to rot, until a Las Vegas wallpaper hanger named Herb Robbins visited, fell for the place, and used lottery winnings to buy it, fix it up, and eventually convince other people to buy homes there too. Today, it's one of the only ghost towns in Nevada where you can actually spend the night in a restored miner's cabin and have a drink in a saloon that still opens for guests. Charming as it is, the next stop offers no such comfort, just Joshua trees and silence. Number 15 is Palmetto, out in Esmeralda County's high desert, sitting inside a genuine forest of Joshua trees. It never grew large, and it never made headlines. It's one of the quieter entries on this list, the kind of place where the ruins are sparse enough that the trees themselves feel like the main attraction. Twisted and ancient, standing guard over what's left of a mining camp that came and went without much fuss. There's no dramatic collapse to tell here, no scandal and no disaster. Just a small silver camp swallowed slowly by the desert around it. From quiet abandonment, we move to a town built on something almost no other Nevada camp was built on at all. Number 14 is Marietta in Mineral County. While nearly every other name on this list chased gold or silver, Marietta was built on borax, the so-called white gold of the desert, used in everything from soap to ceramics to glass making. It became one of the earliest and most important borax operations in the state, hauling the mineral out by mule teams long before railroads reached this stretch of Nevada. What remains today are photogenic adobe and stone ruins, a rare glimpse of a Nevada boomtown that wasn't chasing a vein of precious metal at all. Number 13 is Hamilton, set high in the White Pine Mountains near Ely. This was a genuine silver boom in the 1860s, a town that grew fast at serious elevation, exposed to brutal wind and winter, with almost nothing around it to break either one. What's left today are wind-scoured ruins that sit almost alone in the high country, scattered and quiet, with almost no shelter from the elements that eventually helped push residents back down to lower ground. A reminder that altitude and weather killed as many Nevada towns as any dried-up vein of ore ever did. Number 12 is Unionville, down in Pershing County, and this one has a literary claim to fame. Before he was Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens moved here chasing a gold lode, and he later wrote about the experience and his own failures as a prospector in Roughing It. His cabin is still standing, pressed into the hillside, though more than a century of exposure means you can look at it, but you cannot safely go inside. Unionville still has a small population today, somewhere around 20 people living in a genuinely lush little valley by Nevada desert standards, so it's technically alive, but only just. Number 11 is Belmont, high in the Toquima Range at over 7,000 feet, and once the seat of Nye County. Founded in 1866, it grew fast enough to build a proper courthouse by 1876 and a hotel grand enough to be called the Cosmopolitan. And that courthouse, along with a saloon and a couple of old mills, is remarkably well preserved today. There's a local story, and it's worth being clear that this part is legend rather than documented fact, that World War II pilots used the town's old mill chimney for target practice while training in the empty desert around it. What is documented is the architecture itself, still standing at altitude, watching over empty streets, with a preservation group actively working to keep the ruins from finally giving out. Number 10 is Tybo, deep in a remote Nye County canyon, dominated by the tall stone stack of its old smelter. There isn't much conversation to be had in Tybo. No B&B, no reunion of old families, just scattered stone foundations and that single stack rising out of the canyon floor, visible from a long way off before you ever reach the town itself, a landmark for a place that otherwise gives you almost nothing to hold on to. Number 9 is Berlin, and this one comes with a twist that has nothing to do with mining at all. Berlin was a silver town from the late 1800s, and today it's preserved by Nevada's state park system in a deliberate state of arrested decay. Miners' cabins with furniture still inside, an old assay office with its original equipment left in place, a 30-stamp mill, and an old Ford truck parked outside it that might be one of the most photographed objects in the entire state. But right next to the ghost town sits the Fossil House, home to the largest concentration of ichthyosaur fossils found anywhere on Earth, marine reptiles that swam through this same ground when it was an ocean floor, hundreds of millions of years before a single miner ever set foot here. Two different kinds of extinction from two completely different eras of this planet's history, sitting a few hundred feet apart from each other in the same patch of Nevada desert. Number 8 is Aurora, and its geography alone makes it one of the strangest entries on this list. Aurora sits so close to the California border that, for a stretch, nobody was entirely sure which state it belonged to. It was genuinely disputed, treated as a functioning county seat by officials in both California and Nevada at the same time before a proper survey finally settled the question. Mark Twain shows up here too, before Unionville and before he was even calling himself Mark Twain, working as a miner during Aurora's silver boom and documenting his own failed attempts at striking it rich, material that would later shape his writing. Today, only scattered brick ruins, foundations, and a large cemetery remain of what was once a serious contender to be a major Nevada city. Its identity permanently tangled up in a border dispute nobody remembers anymore. And if you're enjoying this countdown so far, this is a good moment to make sure you're subscribed because we're only about halfway through. And I promise the entries from here get significantly stranger, starting with a town that had to haul in every single drop of water it used from miles away. Number 7 is Seven Troughs, and this might be the single most physically isolated place on this list. Gold turned up here in 1906, and within 2 years, more than 1,500 people had built a functioning town. Stores, saloons, a post office, in a location so harsh that every drop of water had to be hauled in from springs miles away. The boom barely lasted 5 years before the ore ran out and the town was left to the desert. Getting there today means navigating genuinely difficult roads, the kind that keep casual visitors away entirely. And the reward, if you make it, is having an entire abandoned town completely to yourself, with nothing but wind and the sound of your own footsteps. Number 6 is Candelaria, sitting between Tonopah and Hawthorne, and it earns its spot through sheer harshness rather than any single dramatic event. This was a punishing place to live, dry and unforgiving, so remote that supplies had to be hauled in over difficult terrain. And its hillside cemetery tells that story better than any standing ruin does. Rows of markers for young miners whose lives were cut short by disease, accidents, and the sheer difficulty of frontier life at altitude in the desert. Walking through Candelaria feels rawer than most of the more polished ghost towns on this list, a direct, unfiltered look at how hard this landscape really was, with none of the restoration or reunions that soften some of the other entries on this list. Number 5 is Nelson, built up around the old Tecata Cup mine in El Dorado Canyon not far outside Las Vegas. This district pulled gold, silver, copper, and lead out of the ground, and it was largely settled by deserters from the Civil War, which tells you something about the kind of law and order the town actually had. With that kind of population, land disputes turned violent more than once, and disagreements over claims here had a habit of ending in gunfights rather than lawsuits. On top of that, the canyon itself was prone to sudden flash flooding, which eventually made the site too dangerous and unpredictable to sustain a permanent town. Today, it's one of the more accessible ghost towns near Las Vegas, complete with mine tours through the same tunnels that once made this one of the roughest camps in the state. Its dramatic canyon setting has drawn filmmakers for years, and the property is now dotted with vintage cars and mining relics left in place, turning a genuinely violent piece of Nevada history into one of the more visited stops on this entire list. Number 4 is Metropolis, and this one breaks the pattern completely because it was never a mining town at all. It was founded around 1910 by a Massachusetts businessman named Harry Pierce and his Pacific Reclamation Company, with a plan to turn empty Elko County sagebrush into an agricultural hub for as many as 7,000 people, farmed mostly by Mormon settlers drawn in by the company's own newspaper, which promised a long growing season and plenty of water. For a couple of years, it actually looked like it might work. A 3-story hotel with hot and cold running water, central heating, and its own electric generator, a proper brick schoolhouse, a rail spur, and a population that reached into the hundreds. Then it fell apart in almost biblical fashion. The company's own town newspaper had gone as far as suggesting Metropolis might one day steal the county seat away from Elko itself. Instead, a lawsuit over water rights from the company's own dam went against them. Drought followed. A typhoid outbreak swept the town in the winter of 1915, Then came a plague of jackrabbits, followed by a plague of Mormon crickets, both of which finished off what was left of the crops. The hotel eventually burned down in 1936. What remains today is a brick school archway standing alone in a field, and a well-kept cemetery that's about the only part of Metropolis that still sees regular visitors. Number 3 is Delamar in Lincoln County, and this is where the tone of this list needs to shift, because Delamar's history involves real human loss and deserves to be told with some care. At its peak in the late 1890s, this was one of Nevada's most productive gold camps, home to a few thousand people, a hospital, an opera house, and enough saloons to fill a small city. But the gold here was locked inside quartzite rock, and processing that ore released a fine silica dust that miners and townspeople breathed in for years. Many developed a lung disease called silicosis, and it claimed enough lives over time that the town became known grimly as the Widowmaker. Local accounts describe several hundred widows living there at once. It's a hard piece of Nevada mining history, one that speaks to how dangerous this work genuinely was, and the 2 remaining cemeteries at the site still carry that story in their headstones today. Number 2 is Jarbidge, and it's connected to one of the strangest true crime stories in the entire American West. Jarbidge sits at the bottom of a canyon more than 2,000 feet deep in the far northeast corner of the state, and in 1916, it was about as cut off from the rest of the country as any town in America. Founded only a few years earlier as a tent camp after a gold rush had brought over 1,000 prospectors in through the snow. On the night of December 5th that year, during a blinding snowstorm, a mail wagon driver named Fred Searcy was killed on the narrow grade leading into town, and roughly $4,000 in payroll money was taken. When the wagon failed to arrive, the town's postmaster organized a search party, and they found Searcy's body the next morning. What followed became a genuine milestone in American forensic history. A bloody palm print found on an envelope at the scene led to the conviction of a drifter named Ben Cool, the first time in a U.S. courtroom that palm print evidence, rather than a fingerprint, secured a guilty verdict in a trial that drew national newspaper attention to a town most Americans had never heard of. It's still remembered today as the last stagecoach-style mail robbery in the country's history. The stolen money was never found, and some say it's still buried somewhere in that canyon. Jarbidge is still there today, still without a paved road for 20 miles in any direction, home to fewer than 100 people, with the old jailhouse from the case still standing on its single street. And that brings us to number 1, the town that would not stay buried. St. Thomas sits in what's now the Lake Mead National Recreation Area, and its story starts peacefully enough. Mormon settlers led by Thomas Smith founded it back in 1865, hoping to grow cotton along the Muddy and Virgin Rivers, and it grew into a real community of farms and small businesses, at one point even serving as a county seat. The explorer John Wesley Powell ended his first expedition down the Colorado River near here in 1869, and decades later, President Calvin Coolidge himself passed through and stayed at the town's small hotel. For a long stretch, St. Thomas looked like one of the more stable settlements in this part of Nevada. Then came the Hoover Dam. As the dam went up in the 1930s and the Colorado River backed up behind it to form Lake Mead, the water started climbing towards St. Thomas, and the town began to empty out. Most residents left by the early 1930s, but a few refused to believe the water would actually reach them. On June 11, 1938, the last resident, a man named Hugh Lord, climbed into a rowboat as the water rose around his own house and paddled away. Within weeks, St. Thomas was gone, buried under as much as 60 or 70 feet of water. its school, its ice cream parlor, and its streets sitting silently in the dark for years. But Lake Mead has never stayed full. As drought lowered the water level again and again over the following decades, Thomas kept doing something no other ghost town on this list can do. It came back. It broke the surface briefly in 1945 and again in 1962, staying exposed that time for 9 full years before the water climbed back over it. It vanished again from 1972 until 2002, and this time it has simply stayed up as the lake's level has continued to drop year after year. Former residents and their descendants have actually held reunions on the site each time it resurfaced, in 1945, in the 1960s, and again in 2012, walking the same streets their parents or grandparents once left behind, standing in the ruins of a schoolhouse that spent decades completely underwater. Today, you can walk a marked trail past the exposed foundation of that school, past the standing wall of what used to be an ice cream parlor, past a shoreline still scattered with shells left behind by a lake that used to be here and, for now, no longer is. Nobody knows if St. Thomas will vanish under the water again someday. That uncertainty is exactly what makes it the strangest entry on this entire list. Not a town that died once, but one that keeps almost coming back to life, and then almost dying, all over again. 17 towns, and not one of them ended the way the people who built it expected. Gold that ran out, water that never showed up, dust that turned deadly, a robbery that made forensic history, and in one case, water that showed up and simply never left. That's Nevada's ghost town map in a single sentence. A state where the desert keeps the receipts, long after everyone who built these places is gone. If you want more of these deep dives into the strangest, most isolated corners of American history, subscribe and come back next week. And let me know down in the comments which one of these 17 you would actually want to go stand in yourself.